Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. This next one affects all three of those. We're talking about the latest tariffs the president is putting into place. Former auto supplier executive and analyst Jan Griffiths joins us, and Dan Casey, a financial advisor with Bridge River Advisors, talks about people's money every single day. And so we thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Let's begin with you, Jan. When you hear about this president saying that essentially we're talking about $100 billion worth of benefit every single year that these tariffs will produce, do you believe that that will happen?
No, absolutely not. There's no way that we'll see that benefit in terms of those numbers. We have to go back to the basics, Roop, and understand what a tariff is and who pays it. So ultimately, if you want to bring a good or something, a vehicle, a part, into this country, you have to pay the tariff. You are the importer of record and you have to pay the tariff. You then have the opportunity to either absorb that, eat that cost, which you can do, or you can pass it on to the consumer. And so in the auto industry, we all know that the supply base really doesn't have a lot of room in their profit margins. They're extremely fragile right now. So they will pass on the tariff to the automaker, and the automaker in turn will pass it on to the consumer.
And the consumer are the very men and women who come to see Dan Casey in his office to say, hey, I'm having some money issues. I want to understand where I should invest, what I should do, what's next. What are you telling your clients right now about this really uncertain time when it comes to tariffs?
Yeah, so it's funny too. I even had someone today in my office say that they were thinking of buying a car in the next year or two, but bought it sooner rather than later because of the tariffs. And then so tariffs are going to cause inflation. There's no way around it. Anytime that there's a shift of supply and demand, which is going to be when the tariffs come in, is when you usually get inflation. So I think that inflation is going to rear its ugly head again, and of course prices are going to go up. Now I don't think necessarily, like Jan said, that 100% of it's going to fall on the consumer. It's a lot of times the company themselves will eat a little bit. It's such a, as I've said before, tariffs don't happen in a vacuum. And some of those supplies that we have sent overseas to build a car and then bring it back, those won't be tariffs. So it's not like it's going to be a direct transfer.
In other words, it's not on the parts per se, but it's on the final car, the final product. And but some of these cars go other places to be made and then come back.
Right.
But I do want to talk about one thing I find interesting. When we think about foreign automakers, we automatically think Mazda, Honda, Kia, Hyundai. But what we need to realize is that so many American car companies build their cars other places. In fact, I believe the statistic goes something like 40% of General Motors vehicles are built elsewhere. Yet Ford Motor Company won't be hit as hard because more than 75% of their vehicles are built in America. Talk about how this will affect American automakers.
Yes, so 1 in 5 of the vehicles sold in the U.S. come from Canada and Mexico. And a big chunk of those are actually GM, Ford, Stellantis, and Volkswagen. So what's happening now with this new announcement with the 25% tariff, President Trump was not clear in the press conference yesterday, but as you know, Roop, the devil is in the detail. So the detail tells us that vehicles that are manufactured in what we know as previous NAFTA, USMCA, this trade agreement that we have between Canada, Mexico, and the US, those vehicles that are manufactured in Mexico or Canada, the percentage of parts in those vehicles that do not come from the US will be subject to the tariff. So it gets complicated.
So I think that's why Dan was saying it's a little complicated. It's not in a vacuum. For instance, Tesla, Elon Musk's very company, yes, it's an American company that's built, the car is in America. However, there are parts that come from elsewhere.
Yes.
And because of that, the price of Teslas may even go up because of this.
But most of it is, he makes them here. And
the cars are made here, yes.
Which is why their stock went up. Same with Rivian. They build everything here and sell things here. And why all the U.S. automakers dropped. And GM even more so because the majority of GM's cars come from Canada and Mexico.
It is interesting to see people like Sean Fain, who has never been a fan of President Donald Trump, come out and praise President Trump, saying you finally got it right when it comes to fair trade. Has it been inequitable in the past? And perhaps that's even something that someone can argue. It has been, right? But is this the way to correct it, Jen?
It is one way to correct it. It is not the way to correct it in the auto industry. Look, we're all Michiganders here. We all want to see Michigan do well. We want strong manufacturing in the US? Of course we do. And when you hear at the top level, when Trump says we're going to put tariffs on products that come from other countries so that will incentivize people to build more plants in the US, and therefore there will be more jobs. Okay, I mean, that sort of makes sense at a very high level.
Long term.
Long term.
Yeah.
But when you really start to peel it back and understand the complexities of the automotive industry, you know that we have these global supply chains that we've spent decades building and crafting. And you have to understand the reasons why we decided to put product in these other countries. There are 3 primary reasons. Cost.
Sure.
Number 1, right? So we went to Mexico, we went to low-cost countries because of the cost. You bring that back to the US, you're going to pay a higher price. Capacity. We didn't have the capacity in the US. We couldn't make them here. And then finally, the technology. There are some products that we just simply cannot and do not make here. Electronics would be a classic example.
We've talked about chips in the past. Of course,
Yes.
we know what happened during COVID with the chip manufacturing. Final question, Dan, to you I want to ask is consumer confidence. This is a president who took pride in the economy. He left Mr. Biden, the president, when he left office. He promised during the election that inflation would go down and that the price of eggs and gas will go down. What does this do to that promise?
So a lot of that's come true. I mean, I don't know if you recently looked at the price of eggs, but they've come down substantially. So, and oil has pretty much stayed the same, gone down a little bit, which affects obviously fuel prices. So, and inflation has come. It's, you know, it ticked up a little bit in February, but it has come down again. Pricing has not so much come down, it's compounded, but inflation rate, it's not inflation price, it's inflation rate. So future prices, it should come down. But you know, I guess I can just say bottom line, it's better now than it was. And
that's the bottom line, that the reason 70+ million people voted for this president, they wanted a better economy. It'll be interesting to see what happens with these tariffs as we move forward.
We're getting there.
Yeah, and we'll see as we move forward how that will look. It is so good to see you both. We thank you for your time here on The Pulse tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
And please come back again. Well, still ahead tonight, massive cuts coming to the Department of Health and Human Services. How much the agency is downsizing and the concerns Metro Detroit health organizations have. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Welcome back.